The Branding Your Business podcast is for small business owners looking to build a customer favorite brand and a value-driven business. From solo shows covering marketing tactics to experts sharing their brand stories, each episode delivers actionable insights for entrepreneurs who want to impact the world. We're sharing how strategic moves and authentic connections can build a profitable business minus the burnout. Tune into the Branding Your Business podcast with me, Praise Santos McKenna of Come Plum, to design a brand your audience adores while building a life you love. Welcome back to the Branding Your Business podcast. Again, my name is Praise Santos McKenna. I'm your host and the founder of the branding studio Come Plum in San Francisco, California. And today I have a fellow Californian on the podcast with me, but she is in Los Angeles. Let me tell you a little bit about my friend Baily, which we tried to think of how we got connected, which is just the interwebs and the internet of things that we have mutual friends. We have a lot of shared values. And then we're like, but were we on Threads together? Is that how? Or were we on like another social media that we have now forgotten? Maybe we were on like Zanga together, or who knows? Like it's funny. It's funny to trace. We need to have an ancestry.com for internet
Oh my
friends.
God. Yes. I
Yeah.
say that all the time. I wish LinkedIn did a better job of telling you when you connected and where you both were and like trace it back because you know it has the data.
Yes, I know. I'm like, you're tracking everything we do. So can you just
Literally,
remind
make it
us of these
easy.
like minor dates that are actually really
Right.
important to us? So we will figure this out along the way. Or
We're going to
maybe
get
this
to the
is
bottom of
me
it.
and Bailey's new plugin or our startup. We're going to figure it out. But Baily Hancock is a connection strategist, keynote speaker, and host of the Seeking the Overlap podcast, who teaches people how to build authentic relationships with themselves and others with, okay, we love alliteration, Baily, with 3 C's.
Love
Okay,
alliteration.
remember this, people: community, connection, and collaboration. And so I was a recipient of Baily's newsletter, and it is jam-packed. So this is already a plug that we're going to link her newsletter in the show notes too, but you need to sign up if you share any of these values. If you like want to live in a good world and you like people, please sign up for her email newsletter, listen to her podcast. But I just reached out to her. I'm like, we need to talk about this on the podcast because this is so much a part of branding and business, and good ethical businesses too have these values. So I knew I needed to have Baily on. So thank you so much for being here, Baily. I'm so excited you said yes. And for those, I know some people listen to this podcast on audio, but if you're watching on video, you can see a bit of Baily's artistry in the back. Tell us a little bit. Are we in like your painting studio too right now?
Oh my gosh. We're in my office. I'm extremely lucky to have a home office. And when 2020 happened, I had already been doing most of my client calls on Zoom for years, but it ratcheted up, obviously. And I was on Zoom all day, every day. And I realized that I looked at my background constantly. And I've always had pretty backgrounds, but I started to be more intentional thinking about my background as an extension of my personality. And so I keep changing it up. Usually about every year or so, I'll pick new things. But what you're seeing behind me, right behind my head, my kids did those. They're just, they did some finger painting and I just thought they were so beautiful. This piece is from an artist. These 2 pieces are from an artist. And then this, just started painting, attempting to have a hobby. So this is my new hobby. I'm just messing around currently trying to get the hang of it. But yeah, I guess it is part artist studio as well, my painting studio, because this is my everything room. It's like I get one room in the house that's just mine and it must play a lot of roles. But I definitely wanted to be really intentional about the things that were represented behind me because it does represent who you are as a person, right? And people make assumptions. And so I figured, well, I may as well put some effort into it then.
There were a lot of hidden business gems in there, a lot of branding gems that you are communicating something, whether you put intention around it or not. Might as well put intention around it. Might as well, if this is like more subliminal. I make a lot of assumptions about Baily, about her artistry, about her value of beauty too, just by what she puts behind her. And the fact that there's a plant alive back there also says a lot about you.
Listen, it is fake. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now. It is fake. It is a fake fiddle leaf because your girl can do a lot of things, but keep all kinds of plants alive is not one of them. Fiddle leaves are notoriously challenging, which is funny because I always tell on myself right? I'm always like, oh, it's not real. Don't be excited. So it's like, what's the point? I don't know. But yeah, it adds some nice greenery. I do have live plants in front of me that are on either side of my desk that I have managed to keep alive for a good period of time. But that one has been with me for about 6 years now. And I can pretend. I pretend a lot. Fake it till you make it with your plant mothership.
This is authenticity at its finest. Here I am calling you out on your beautiful fiddly fig, but the fact that you bought an artificial fiddly fig because you knew your capacity, and yet you have front facing plants that maybe the world doesn't need to see, but we know that you know how to water them and take care of them.
I do. Not the high maintenance plans. I have enough high maintenance parts of my life, like toddlers and a business. I can't be pouring too much in. You've got to be a bit self-sustaining for me to get you on board. That's why I have cats and not dogs. Same idea.
Yes. Hashtag know thyself. Baily is a woman who knows herself, and we
Correct.
really appreciate that.
Yes.
So we know this is what we've learned about Baily so far. She's just mid plant motherhood, and that's okay. But I will tell you what she is queen bee of, and one of her C's is connection. And connection has been your jam professionally for over a decade, but I imagine way before that too. Can you tell us just a little anecdote of how a connection or relationship helped grow your business and where you are today?
Well, my business wouldn't exist without my connections, just full stop. I had a business from 2016 to 2021. It was collaboration consulting, where I taught primarily women service based business owners how to grow their business with partnerships. And it baked in to what I was consulting people on and teaching people how to do was connecting with others to achieve your goals better, faster, with less money, less energy, all of that. So, connection has always been at the core of everything I've done as a business owner. I've never paid for marketing. I've always collaborated with others who have platforms to basically share my expertise and my time and my wisdom in exchange for ideally measurable promotion to a well aligned audience. So, it's all been through my connections. I'm pretty much 100% referral marketing, in addition to being a guest on podcasts and doing speaking gigs and teaching workshops for well aligned communities as a means to, grow my own audience with people who I think would benefit from what I have to say and be interested in working with me. So, from a professional perspective, even before I started running my own business, I did partnerships. And that's what I did for different companies, for an ad agency, for General Assembly, back when it was brand new in Los Angeles. I did global business development and partnerships, which 100% is based on connection and networking. And then, even long before that, even in roles that didn't directly require working with other people, which there really is no such thing. I mean, every job you have requires working with others and ideally meeting others. I've been a connector, a super connector my entire life from the time I was in elementary school, having friends meet other friends. And one of my greatest joys is when my friends become friends. So long as they don't leave me out and hang out without me, that always kind of makes me a little jealous. But that's been one of the things I've always loved to do is to say, oh my gosh, wait, Praise, you need to meet my friend so and so. You guys would totally hit it off. Or you tell me you want to do something. And I'm like, I know 5 people to connect you with who can help you do that thing. So, personally, professionally, connection has always been the through line for my entire life.
Yeah, and you're not trying to connect with everyone. You
No.
use a word that we use a lot on the podcast of alignment and figuring out who those good connections are. In the same way that even as you're being a friend connector, you're not saying, hey, Praise, you need to meet all my friends. You're saying, hey, these are these 4 or 5 people who come to mind immediately once I get to know you that feel like you would sync up. Now, tell me, is alignment something that is nature versus nurture? Is it something you grew over time, or just Baily has good gut feeling? She can read people well. How can people figure out what alignment is? Maybe if they're not the most people.
It's such a great question. It's one I've never really considered, but if I think about it, it's a bit of both nature and nurture. I have an excellent sense of intuition. Doesn't mean I've always listened to it, right? I've always had really good gut instincts and I've ignored them a lot. throughout my life. I've gotten better and better at not ignoring the nudges and the sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle calls to do something or introduce people. But now I know to trust when somebody pops into my head as I'm talking to somebody else. I don't ever hesitate now. This happens daily, to be honest with you, because I talk to so many people every day. But just recently, I was in Austin, Texas for a friend's wedding, and I connected with my friend Diane. And the entire time I was with her, I was like, oh my God, I need to introduce you to my friend's mom, Teresa. I just feel like you guys would hit it off. I just have a sense. And I said it a few times. She's like, I'm not stopping you. Introduce us. And I'm like, okay, I just felt like I had to sell it to you. And she's like, I trust you. And that is inherent to connecting people. They have to trust you, because if you're connecting somebody, there's such a difference between connecting somebody because you have a sense that somebody else is going to be good for them in some way or helpful or beneficial, and connecting them because there's some other reason behind it that's maybe not in their best interest, right? And you see this with sales, with promotions a lot of the time. This is why I sort of have hesitations about influencer marketing, because I think most of us now don't fully trust it anymore because we know there's money at hand, right? There's money being exchanged. It becomes advertising to me at that point, as opposed to collaboration or genuine recommendation of a person or a thing or a product. So yes, I've always had sort of an instinct of who to connect people with based on who pops into my mind, but it's been something I've honed over time and I've begun to trust more and more. So when I do connect people now, it's almost always because they've randomly popped into my head, or I thought of somebody when I read somebody's post or heard somebody talking about something. I do connect people who ask to be connected to somebody in my network, but I do it far less frequently than I do out of just the genuine desire to connect to people. So I'll have people reach out and say, hey, I'm looking to be a guest on these podcasts that you've been on. Will you connect me to the host? Praise, if you said, hey, can you connect me to Emily with this podcast? I'd say, sure, I will reach out to Emily and see if she's okay with me making that connection, because I want to give the person the first right of refusal to say, I'm not in a headspace for wanting to connect with somebody right now, or I'm not looking for new guests. I'm good, before I just blindly make an intro. So I respect that and I go with my gut.
Yeah, those are really good tips where some of it's intuitive. And I love that. There's oftentimes a reason, and it seems like it happens to you every day, which is wild,
It
that
does.
people pop into your head and maybe you find out a year, 5 years down the line why it happened. So there is part of that intuition. But it seems like there are a lot of best practices here too of the word I'm hearing is service. Will it serve this person, both of these people, both of these parties being connected, to make that connection? And even when, like, kind of in the more traditional networking way, when people ask to introduce, you don't just blindly, without their permission, without their right to refusal, copy them on an email. I think about being connected that way. I'm like, ick. Now I am either seeming rude if I don't respond, when in fact I'm just busy or at capacity or our season
Right.
is full or something like that. Whereas that way of thinking about it, of service and giving the right to refusal to the right people, seems like the right method to go about it. Are there other ways that networking or connecting can be less icky or just
Mm.
better use of people skills?
Oh my gosh. The bar is so low because networking as a concept, I don't actually know anybody that likes it. Even the people that are good at it and know they want to do it and need to do it, there still comes with it this feeling of ick and cringiness and like, I'll do it. Right. And it's like we're all gearing up and putting on armor to go to a networking event. I think one of the best tips I can offer when it comes to networking is stop thinking of it as networking and start thinking of it as curating your community. Because networking implies you're just throwing a net out and you're catching whatever fish get caught in that net. You don't care what kind of fish they are. You don't care if they're the ones you're looking for. You don't care if you have something to offer them and they have something to offer you. You're just collecting people. And you can do that. And at that point, it's a quantity over quality game. But personally, I don't feel like that brings a lot of good vibes and good energy and good feelings along with it. So instead, if you can think of it as curating a community, what that does is it shifts your perspective from taking whoever you can find to being intentional about the kind of people you're seeking to bring into your world, which I call your community. So, the way that this plays out for me is I have a criteria for the people that are in my world. They have to be generous, they have to be kind, and they have to be curious. And if they're not those three things, they likely don't get in. It's like I'm a bouncer of my own club, and those are the criteria. If they don't meet them, they're not coming in. And the reason is if you're not those three things, generous with your time and your knowledge, kind to yourself and other people, and curious about yourself and other people, we're just not going to vibe. And if you are part of my community, you're part of my community forever. And I will go to bat for you. I trust you. And the idea is that you trust me in return. And trust is such a core component of connection that I don't do anything that will compromise the trust I've built with my people and my audience and the people I collaborate with, all of whom I would consider in the same community. So trust is huge. And intentionality is huge when it comes to meeting new people and having some kind of criteria that you stick to, that you don't, bend on or break on for certain people because it'll fall apart eventually anyway. Or if you welcome somebody in who doesn't meet your criteria and somebody else in your community or your network meets them, they basically represent you. They kind of act as a proxy for you and your integrity and your service based business or whatever it is. So it's got to be really intentional, and you need to make sure that you're protecting the trust that you have built with the people in your community.
This is so good because here at the Branding Your Business podcast, we talk a lot about values, knowing what your personal values are, what your business values are, and also this brand that you're building is your reputation. It's what people think, feel, and say about you. And so curator is such a good word. Bouncer is also such a good word too, of that just like protectiveness. And I love the words that you use, that kind, generous, and curious. Baily knows herself. She knows what her community is comprised of, and she wants to accept these same people who hold these same values, because then they can make an easier assumption like, oh, those who are in Baily's community, they also hold these values. That means I could reach out to them. You can make a lot of assumptions, but they had to get in the door first. They had to be in there, which leads me to a stickier question, and that humans are changing beings, and humans are also complicated people. And I imagine some people are listening to this of like, yes, of course, like we know how to do this. We want these people to have these values, but what happens if they used to have these values and then something changes or something like makes you uncomfortable with them, or you think to yourself, I don't want those people to refer me or consider me in their network because then now I'm being associated with them. So this is almost the opposite question. There's
Mhm.
there's networking or like community curation, as you said.
Mhm.
How do you kindly break up with people in your community once you realize maybe it was over time that there is no
Mhm.
longer alignment? Do we just kind of modern day ghost? Do we not text back? Do we need to have a conversation? How
Mhm.
nuanced is it? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
It is sticky. I call it pruning your network, right? It's like I think of your community as a garden, and anybody that's ever planted anything or is familiar with a garden knows you can't just let everything run wild. You have to weed, you have to prune, you have to make room for the healthy plants to grow. And I'd say there's not a specific strategy I have for how to prune like very overtly. The way that I've always handled it is if somebody's name comes up in conversation and there's sort of a question of, should I work with this person? They reached out to me, they mentioned you, like whatever it is, I assess the current situation. Like, what's my relationship with the person I'm talking to about this? Am I free? Is there enough trust that I can be transparent about the other person and say, I can think of a couple other people I would introduce you to before them. Or, you know, they've changed their perspective over the years, or, there's delicate ways with tact that you can do it. But I will never send somebody down a path that I know is going to end in a particular way. And so once somebody shows me who they are, and, that's a big part of connecting with new humans too, is believing people when they show you who they are and trusting that If they're showing you negative characteristics, then go ahead and it's okay to make some assumptions about that. It's often the opposite, where they're showing a lot of great characteristics, but perhaps there's some uglier ones that are buried a little bit lower. You can't always see that right off the bat, and that's okay. And I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But when you do see somebody's true colors, or if somebody has changed, there are delicate ways to make sure that your name isn't being swept up with them. I have very strong feelings about ghosting. I do not believe in ghosting. I think it's the quickest way to disconnection. Even if you want to technically disconnect with somebody, it's not the kind way to do it. So, yes, if they have emailed you or they have texted you or they have sent you a message and they're waiting for a reply from you, always give them a reply, no matter what. And the reply can be, depending on what they've left the conversation at, kind of back out a little bit and say, you know what, why don't we touch base in 6 months or a year when I have more capacity for this? Or, there's a lot of ways that you can say what you're trying to say without saying it to hurt their feelings, but give the appearance of like, this isn't going to happen right now. Because again, perhaps things shift for them again, and maybe they're just in a tough phase of life, right? There have definitely been people who I've collaborated with and connected with who I either saw a different side of them because they were going through something and they were not at their best. And then a couple years later, they popped back into my world and it seemed like they were in a better headspace. And ideally, we're all evolving all of the time. Sometimes that's for the better and sometimes it's not. And so I think what's important is to react to the person that's in front of you today. So if they're in a place where you're like, I'm not going to sit at the same table as you right now because I don't want to be associated with the vibes that you're putting off here, that is totally fine. Boundaries are healthy. And I think it's always okay to revisit relationships over a period of time, right? And I'll give you a very real example of this. So when I got married 7 years ago, I had some friendship breakups happen, which oddly happens around weddings, right? The emotions are high. People have preconceived notions, especially when it comes to bridesmaids. And I had a couple of friends that we had friendship breakups during the time leading up to my wedding. And each of them went very differently. One was explosive, one was more of like a slow fade. And I recently saw the slow fade one at the wedding I went to a couple weeks ago. And it was like no time had passed. We were good. It was fine. But throughout the last 7 years, I have put up a boundary with her. I have not engaged in, her text to me or she's called me. I've just not been in a headspace that I wanted to do that. And I felt no guilt about that. And then when we saw each other at the wedding, I was like, okay, I will reevaluate this boundary because it seems like you've matured a lot. I'm in a different place. We've both grown. I'm okay giving this another opportunity. And I never talked shit about her. I never said anything bad. I would just say, yeah, we haven't been in touch recently if somebody asked. And so that's some way to do it as well, which is true for a lot of our relationships, right? They fade in, they come back, they fade out. And so I think what's important is you continue to evaluate the person that's in front of you, not the person you knew 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, or even 1 year ago. And that's the best wisdom I can give on that because it's really freaking hard.
Yeah, expectations can be a very interesting thing to measure on our end because we might not have obvious expectations of people, but we have a lot of ingrained ones of other people and ourselves. And a lot of what I heard from you, and I think this is so good and so practical, that whether we are navigating personal or professional relationships, evaluating the person that's in front of you, also evaluating your own capacity at the time too. And it's not that we are ghosting them, we're giving the space, like healthy
Mhm.
breathing space, and also giving the grace for both of you to say, like, okay, let's revisit in 6 months to a year and see where we are then, see what our gut says then. And I am just so grateful when I think about it. I have been in really interesting headspaces personally that I knew affected my professional relationships. And I'm really grateful for the people and collaborators who gave me that space and grace too. And hopefully it helps me do the same with the folks that we collaborate with and we partner with, whether
Yeah.
personally or professionally as well. So I think that is huge. And thank you for giving that example. I don't know what it is about weddings. Yeah, it's the emotional charge, it's the
Yeah.
public declaration of like a union or a
So
relationship that's
much.
really important to you. But a lot gets unearthed, a lot gets messy.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a bad thing, honestly. Sometimes you need a catalyst to really show you where you stand with people. And I honestly think out is better than in for a lot of these situations. I really do. And even with that friend, you know, the slow fadeaway one, I had a lot of compassion for what was going on in her mind and heart. And I also had a lot of compassion for what was going on in mine at the time. And I didn't have space for it, period. I didn't have space for it. So I put up a very firm boundary. And she knew that. This was not a ghost situation. I didn't leave her on red. I told her exactly where I was. And with this reunion, I came into it with an open heart and an open mind that if it felt like something I wanted to pick back up, and just kind of act like nothing ever had gone on, then I would. And that's exactly how it played out. And because of that, I think we have a road forward now to rebuilding something new, not drudging up the history that we've had, but starting a brand new chapter, which is saying a lot for a 30-year relationship, which is what we have.
That is really huge. And it just sounds like you're giving the garden this space. Maybe you're planting a new garden or taking that seed and like planting it in a different pot and being
Right.
okay with that, which I think is really beautiful. I did love that garden analogy. And it does seem like gardening connections is truly your thing into 2025. Partnerships are still important. Have you seen anything work that's like something new, something fresh, new gardening trends in
Mm.
networking and connection and cultivating connection that you'd recommend to people, especially some small business owners? Is it still the classic LinkedIn, or is there some new, fresh way that's been working really well for you or maybe the people that you work with?
The thing I always recommend people to do is help people help you. And there's a little model that I created, the ABC model, and it's ask for what you want. So, whether that's in one on one conversations, whether that's posting to LinkedIn, putting it in your newsletter, spreading the word some way about what you're focused on right now, what's something you want. An example of this is a couple of weeks ago, I proclaimed to LinkedIn that I was beginning the process of writing my first book. And I said in there, I am writing my first book. This is what it's going to be based on. I am open to any introductions to agents or editors or publishers. I'm also open to any advice or wisdom or feedback. People who have been through the process, both traditional publishing and self publishing, are willing to offer me. And I put that on LinkedIn and I got a ton of feedback, a ton of comments. Right before this podcast interview, had a call with a potential proposal coach to help me build out a proposal and pitch it to agents, which came from that LinkedIn post. So asking for what you want is always going to be the best way for the people in your community to support you. The B of the ABC model is be clear and specific. I was very clear about what kind of introductions it was that I wanted: agents, publishers, editors, coaches. And so often you see people, either if they even do tell their networks what it is that they are looking for, they want, it's pretty vague. So another example of this is being a guest on podcasts. At the beginning of this year of 2024, I was still very much figuring out what this business was going to be because I was laid off in November of 2023 and very quickly knew I wanted to return to entrepreneurship, but I didn't know in what capacity. I had been collaboration consulting before. I'd done community strategy work. I'd done events. I'd done all kinds of different pieces. So I was like, who am I this round, right? Who am I this time? What is my brand? What am I even selling? Who am I? What's my thing? And one thing that I did know that I could do was be a guest on podcasts. Because for me, and this actually answers your question of what I've seen work, being a guest on podcasts serves so many purposes. One, it helps you grow your audience with ideally like minded souls, right? People that either could use your services or who you might want to know or connect with. It also, for me, helps me gain clarity around my messaging and around my examples that I use and around the kind of metaphors that I use. My garden analogy fully came out of multiple podcast guest interviews that I've given, where on the spot I was like, what's an easy way for me to explain this complicated concept really easily for people to digest? So it's always been a way that I've kind of not worked out my material, but in a way, in real time, found what resonated most with a host in an interview, right? Like if the host was like, oh my God, say more about that, that's such a clear indicator to me that like, okay, I should build that one out a little bit more. And so it's a great way to grow your network. It's a great way to figure out your examples and your frameworks and your nuggets of wisdom. And it's a really great way to be of service to the people in your community. Because if you're a guest on a podcast, in an ideal scenario, you're bringing your wisdom, you're bringing connection points, you're educating people, and you're helping people learn how to do something or feel seen or improve themselves in their business in some way. And for the host, you're providing them with an hour's worth of content that they can then use for their own purposes. So it's an honor to be a guest on a podcast. But as a podcast host myself, I've had 3 shows. This is my 3rd show, Seeking the Overlap. I've had a lot of guests that could have been better. And so I think one of the big pieces of that is helping people understand that there is an art form to it. So I tell you all of this because at the start of the year, I knew that being a guest on podcast was going to serve me in a few different ways, as well as the people in my network. And it was a really quick, easy collaboration I could do with the people that I already had relationships with who had shows. So I posted to LinkedIn that I was looking to be a guest on 15 well-aligned podcasts in the year 2024. I wanted to speak about community connection and collaboration to entrepreneurs, service-based businesses, executive leaders. And I was just very clear about those 2 things. And then the third piece of it, which is the C of the ABC model, is your credibility. You need to highlight your credibility. So in that post, I said what I wanted, be a guest on 15 podcasts. I said I was very clear and specific about who I wanted to speak to and what I wanted to speak about. And then I said, and here is my link to my media page where you can listen to any of my past appearances. Here's a Spotify playlist I made of all of my guest appearances that I've been on before, so that when somebody introduced me to a host or was evaluating whether I'd be a good guest for their show, they didn't have to ask me anything. They already had all the information at their fingertips. And let me tell you, this is, I think, my 26th podcast appearance this year. So I blew past the goal of 15. And being a guest on podcasts has been one of the absolute best uses of my time for all of those reasons I mentioned before. So there's your answer on like how to actually get that support and also what's working in terms of partnerships. Podcast guesting and being a host of a show, and whether it's a podcast or it's an event series or it's a newsletter, being able to contribute your knowledge and your expertise and your story in the form of content to a person that is likely having to create a lot of content is a huge give. And your ask is always going to be well-aligned promotion, right? And so it's a reciprocal, even value exchange, which every partnership should be based upon.
Again, it's that service. It's that service of, okay, I have to know my boundaries. Will this serve me? Is this a good use of my time? And also, will this be appealing to other people? Will this be well aligned with them? Okay, let's review those ABCs. We love a good like alphabetical framework. So ask was A.
Yep. Ask for what you want. Be clear about it is B. And then credibility, highlight your credibility, showcase why somebody should refer you or why they should connect you. And even if you've never been a guest on a podcast and you're specifically looking to do that, feature your credibility in some way, right? You can say, I recorded this, TikTok video, or I've done this Instagram reel, or like showcase that you're not going to be a disappointment to the person that's recommending you. Because again, it's trust, right? They are trusting that you're not going to let them down if they make an intro or they ask you to be on their show. So you got to show them that you're going to show up and you're going to make them look really good for their referral.
Amen and amen. I love to hear that. I love to hear about really putting yourself in the person's shoes that you're asking a favor of. So reminding yourself, how is this beneficial to them? How will this serve them? How do I make sure they look good? And I can honor this curated community they've built as well too. And so keeping all of these factors in mind, which it doesn't have to be complicated, because if they are well aligned, it seems like it'll just flow out. It seems like the ask will become really obvious. And I love that you said you help others help you. Linking your media kit, linking that Spotify playlist.
Make it easy.
Making it a no-brainer. Just because I think about the pitches we get to, I'm like, okay, now I have to research this person.
Right. They give you homework. You're busy. You don't have time for this. It decreases the likelihood of you saying yes so much if they make you do all the work. That's ridiculous.
1,000%. Yeah, because we don't have time, because what we are spending time with is on this Netflix show called Nobody Wants This, which you posted about on
Right.
Instagram. I'm like 7 episodes in, so you can't give away the ending quite yet.
Okay.
Like,
I
I'm waiting
finished
with my
it. I
husband to
finished it
like
in like
watch the
3
episode.
days. Yeah.
Which, okay, so a number of questions about it. First, we're going to talk about there's so much connection there.
Yes.
There's so much vulnerability and authenticity there.
So
And
good.
there's so much love for Los Angeles there too, which
There is.
I like as an LA person, I wonder if that just speaks to you. But for those who don't know what this show is, can you explain a little, give it some background, and then talk about how you've seen just like the life lessons in this wonderful Kristen and Adam perfection of a show?
It's first of all a love letter to millennials, which, thank you. We need that. So, the premise of the show is this podcast host who's very open and transparent and honest and vulnerable to an extent meets this rabbi who's a bit more traditional and he just got out of a bad breakup. They meet through mutual friends, which I already love, and they instantly hit it off. But there's a lot of bumps in the road because there's a lot of complications to their relationship. For one, she's not Jewish, he's a rabbi, kind of an important deal. And what's beautiful about the show is that they don't say how old they are. In real life, Adam Brody and Kristen Bell are both in their early 40s, but I think they're maybe playing, mid to late 30s. Either way, what you see in real time is them pausing and addressing their hangups. They're being really honest about the natural inclinations they each have, where in the past they may have screwed it up right then and there, right? Insecurities, fear, vulnerability, shame, like protection, all of the things that keep us from connecting with somebody else. And listen, all of those things are valid and they exist within us to protect us. And I think a lot of times our subconscious doesn't really realize that we're protecting us so much so that we're putting up these walls to connection. And so, if your goal is to connect with somebody, you do have to get a little bit vulnerable. You do have to be honest. You do have to build that trust. And what the show does so beautifully is show what it can look like when you lay your cards on the table for somebody else and you take the real risk of being honest, because honesty is not always rewarded in the way you want it to be. Sometimes when you show people who you are and you let them in deeper than maybe you've let other people see you, you do run the risk of them rejecting you. And that's a very scary risk when you really like somebody, even if it's platonic, like, right? Even if it's a friend. Something that I realized about myself not that long ago is that I, for so much of my youth, especially elementary, middle, and high school years, I was sort of shape shifting into who I thought people wanted me to be. Because if I wanted to be friends with somebody, I would really start to figure out who they were, what their likes and dislikes were, and just morph into somebody that I thought they would want to be with, whether that was as a girlfriend or a friend. And again, there is positives and negatives to this. The positives are I got to try on a lot of different styles, if you will, try on lot of different likes and dislikes. I learned about bands and music that I would have never known had it not been for crushing on some boy that liked them, right? And then going and downloading all their music on LimeWire, showing my 40-year-old age. But the downside, of course, is you don't want to get too far away from your own likes and dislikes or mask your likes and dislikes to the extent that you suffocate your own flame, so that you're just making sure they think you're somebody they want you to be. So I realized I spent a lot of my life doing that. And as I got older, I'm married now. I've been with my husband for 10 years. I mean, he knows all of me now because he's trapped. So, it's fine. I can be totally vulnerable and honest. But in all reality, even with my friendships, the deeper connections that I have are ones that were formed when I was just being brutally honest, or I shared something a little scary to share. And I put myself out there in a way that could have led to them being like, "Oh, nope, not for me, thanks." And the thing about that is, and I have to explain this to my 5-year-old son now who's in elementary school for the first time. He really wants to be friends with this girl in his class. And he has been so afraid to ask her to play because he's afraid she'll say no. And I'm like, look, man, I get that. And the sooner you get to that no, the sooner you can pick somebody else to play with. And I know that we get our hearts set on certain people. I mean, crushes exist for a reason. But if you're coming at it from the perspective of being fully accepted and seen for who you really are, which unfortunately, real connection can only come when you're being who you really are. Because here's what happens when you're presenting something to somebody that isn't real under the guise of getting them to like you. You're almost baiting and switching them into liking you, right? You're putting on wrapping paper that does not depict what's inside of the box. And so, inevitably, ideally, one day you take that wrapping paper off and they might be totally blindsided and be like, oh, this isn't what I wanted. And even if that never happens, I can tell you from personal experience, you live in fear of that day coming when suddenly they know who you really are and they no longer want it. So even if you've built this long-term relationship with this person, be it romantic or friendship or professional, there is this underlying fear of they're going to figure who you really are one day and then reject you, which I will tell you is significantly worse than just knowing that you're not a good fit right off the jump. So it's easier said than done. But what I've told my son is, look, the worst that can happen is what you're already imagining, which is she's going to say no, in which case you move on to somebody that does want to play with you. And then they say yes because they like you. And then you get to be all of you all of the time with them. And that's so much more real and less scary over time because you know that you gave them the whole thing. You didn't put the package around a different item, like they got what they came for. And so if inevitably the relationship falls apart one day, which is also okay, believe it or not, then you can know it was to no fault of your own in terms of showing them something that wasn't there to begin with or pretending that you were somebody that you weren't. So the quicker you can get to the authenticity and potential alignment with somebody, the more you can trust that relationship is actually real.
So, ladies and gentlemen, she is also a playground consultant. If that wasn't clear from this narrative with her 5-year-old son, too, but it's so true. And it's so good that you're instilling this lesson to your son at a young age as well. It goes back to what we were saying before of trust that what people are showing you is who they are. And so because we have to be recipients of that, we should also be showing people who we are too and not doing
It's
a
the
bait and
kind
switch.
thing to do.
It is the kind thing to do. And also, we don't mean this to be dating advice, but it is dating advice
It's
as
all relevant.
well. Yes,
It's all relevant.
it's that kind of connection. Be true to who you are. Be true so that they can also find their person. And that might be you.
Yes.
The true you might be them. It might be your playground friend. It might be this great collaborator for your business. But if we're faking it, then that's just not going to work. It's not going to serve you. It's not going to serve them. So better to do it sooner than later. This is what we've learned from Kristen and Adam. Again, go watch it. We are not sponsored by Netflix, but also call
you
me
should be.
Netflix if you want to be an ad sponsor. Okay, so on the show, they are so funny because they are podcast hosts. They're two sisters, which I think is so cute, but they are pretty opinionated. And we're going to end the show with some spicy, some gentle opinions though. And we often play the kind of these word games at the end of our show. And we're playing this or that. Intuition is so good, Bailey. You tell me this or that. Which one? You ready?
Great. I'm ready.
Okay. Netflix or Hulu?
Netflix.
Spotify or Apple Podcast?
Spotify all the way.
Ebook or physical book?
Audiobook.
Bonus. Love it. Okay. Are you like a fall girly or are you a winter girly?
Fall.
Fall girly. Okay. Pumpkins. We're here, baby. Okay. We can still be friends, but if you answer this wrong, I'm going to have opinions. Okay. Are you a toilet paper over or are you like the toilet paper under?
Over.
Bailey, thank God. Thank God you
But
said
let
that.
me tell you, Praise, I have a caveat with that because I now have toddlers who, if left alone in the bathroom for more than 30 seconds, have been known to unroll the whole damn thing because it's so much fun to just spin. It's a really hard thing because we will often flip it and it goes against everything in my body, but it takes them longer to do it from the other side. So it's a logistics thing purely. Not the correct way is our way. Let's not get it twisted. Let's make sure it's known right now. But sometimes you got to bob and weave with the toddlers, you know?
Yeah, these are parental values. This is the hierarchy, right? Like how much
It's
headache versus
unfortunate, but
the
yes.
correct way. But
Truth.
they will soon grow out of it. I'm like praying that over
Lord
you.
help me.
Okay, we have a few more. Concerts or dinner parties?
Dinner parties.
Lefty or righty?
Righty.
Okay, last one. Texting or voice memos?
Texting.
Okay, we learned a lot about you, Baily. Thank you so much for serving our audience today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for just being this connector, someone who's so clear about what they're about. Thank you for curating your community, your words of wisdom for us too. Our friends are going to want to find you and connect with you. What is the best way for them to do that?
Best way is to go to seekingtheoverlap.com because that is going to get you to my website. It'll take you to the podcast so you can dive in. There's a bunch of episodes. They come out every Sunday now so that you can go into your week feeling excited and ready to connect with yourself and others. But I also have a great tab on there called resources where you can find so many freebies and downloadables that there's likely something for everybody. So go check it out. Go take all of it. It's yours. But know that you will also end up on my email list this way, which Praise already said was legit. So if you trust Praise, then you're going to be okay.
It's legit. And I am lending my credibility, which is part of the ABC.
Yes.
Baily.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate you having me on. Thank you all for listening. I hope this was helpful. And also, side note, connect with me on LinkedIn. But when you connect, don't just click follow, click connect, and then send me a little DM saying, hey, I heard you on Praise's podcast. Let's be friends. And then I would love to know you.
Again, LinkedIn etiquette. I love this. Thank you so much, Baily.
Thank you, Praise.